yes, we are speaking English again.
Okay.
For beginners.
Next time I'll be able to speak Swedish.
You will, indeed. Lone Scherfig, very nice to have you here. This film is being shown here in Gothenburg today.
Yes.
At 6:30. If anyone felt that, that was a fun, good movie, I want to see that again. We are going to kind of not jump so much back and forth. We're actually going to go back a little and see how your love for cinema, if I may, shaped its way. But when you did get this, when this film came out, the Dogma thing was kind of, people wondered if it would continue, really. And this film really injected a lot of new life into the Dogma movement, so to speak. And there were something like 4 or 5 films made after that, and some of them did really, really well too. When this film, when you got the offer, there were at least some of us who were kind of quite well traveled in Scandinavian cinema, didn't know that much about you at that time, because you hadn't done that many feature films. Why do you think they picked you? I don't know. Was it Lars and the others?
When Centropa moved into a former military base outside of Copenhagen and turned that into film studios. I had shot there when it was still a military base. I remember having shot a film school film some 10, 15 years before this. One of the reasons why Centropa could make that move and buy all these buildings was that they had that Danish television had commissioned a TV series that was initiated by Lars von Trier, a very romantic, endless long family series, and I was hired to direct 13 episodes of that. I came to the military base for the first time and saw 13 different sets, folkloristic and entire 1950s shoe factory. The scripts were not ready and not very good, but I got so tempted by the fact that it was big and to use my craft and to shoot for 18 weeks in a row that I immediately said I'd like to take that job. And after we had finished shooting that, I felt very much at home there, and then they invited me into the Dogma Brotherhood to do the 5th of the films. And I thought I should be faithful to myself and to the things I really liked and try to not do something very pretentious. So I made a lighter Dogma film. And it turned out to be also a more commercial Dogma film that gave me an international attention that was a great help. In a way, this film is about people who are stuck and not very happy with the situation they're in, who, because they take these Italian lessons and because they meet one another, change direction in their lives, and the same thing to a certain extent happened to my career then, and which is now 11 years ago.
You have said you have said in several interviews that before this, I mean, you actually made your first feature film in 1990, which is 11 years before, and after that only one feature film. So this was your third, in fact. So during 11 years, you had made two films, and you have said that, maybe I should have done it a little bit differently.
Yeah, I've been the most recent film I've done, Ian Dog, is about 2 people who you check in on once a year for 25 years, and you see all the detours they make in their lives, and we all do. And some detours are very good for you, and others aren't. And because of that, I've been thinking a lot about all the detours I did in my career, for instance, by only shooting 3 feature films in a time span of 12 years where I was working constantly, doing advertising and television and information films and writing and doing radio drama and a lot of things that were circling around what I love the most, which is the format of the feature-length fiction film. And then recently I looked back at some to check what I actually did do then. Did I really waste that much time? And what was it, and why couldn't I get started? And when I look back, it does make sense how I wasted my time, because I did learn a lot about the craft, and maybe just waiting around to find out what my voice as a director was. And when I look back over all these films, they're not very good, and I'm not very proud of them, but there are 2 seconds here, one scene there, a tracking shot there, a transition here and there in all these films, things that I like and have helped me find a voice as a director and define what it is that I can do that few other people can do. It's not a lot, but it's enough for me to have a good career running and feel that people want to see what I do, and that I get an enormous amount of fun working. But I was educated in a period where films were extremely aesthetic and serious and inspired by the Russian masters, and my own cinematic voice is much lighter. So it might have worked a little bit better if I'd had different teachers who had helped me reveal develop the director and writer that I was going to be, instead of trying to be something that I couldn't be, like Lars von Trier, who was the best kid in school, of course, with his obvious talent and very, very expressive, very, very cinematic talent. My skills are different. But they're good enough for me.
I'm glad to hear that. Before we go into, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the film school years and so forth. But I know that you loved writing very early on, and you have been writing actually short stories that were published when you were quite young, if I'm not mistaken. So did the writing and the cinema interest, did the writing come before the cinema interest?
Yes. I wrote a lot as a child, never poetry and never anything very personal. I've never written diary or anything. It's always for somebody else. And what I really enjoy is writing scripts for other people. So I am now pursuing the script writing career a little bit more again. First of all, so I can get to spend more time in Sweden, where I and it gives me a much better balance with being a mother and a wife, that I can sit at home and work, and then occasionally go and shoot in a foreign country. I think because I've shot 2 films in England, and I think I'm going to do a 3rd one quite soon. The way I can work between those periods and still live in Denmark and still be a normal person and a housewife, and is by writing. And I really enjoy writing for other directors, trying to write something that they can do that I would not be able to do myself. Something that is tailor-made for their particular talent, and where I can try and identify the material with the voice of that director. I think it's much nicer to know who's going to direct it than just to write something. But that's good, and it's a good fallback position when I get either too old or too unpopular to keep shooting.
It's interesting you mentioned Lars von Trier, who invariably turns up in so many discussions when we come to contemporary Danish cinema. He actually, there was a quite a little gem of a story about a young fellow going to film school. The name of the film is Erich Nietzsche.
Yeah.
It's now. It came out a couple of years ago. You were actually the one he wanted to direct it, but then it was directed by a director called Jakob Thuesen, who also was editor on several Lars von Trier films. But you were, I'm correct, I guess, in that you were the first one slated to direct this story of the young Lars von Trier at film school.
Yes, and if he wrote a new script that I
And
could direct, I'd run straight at it.
Yes.
He's a fantastic writer.
And this was written with you in mind, just like you said that you would like to write something for someone else in mind.
Yeah.
Why do you think that Lars wanted you to do it? You never look a gift horse in the mouth, perhaps. You didn't ask him.
Yes, I think he said so, but I think it was that that he felt that it needed, since the film was about himself and his early years. It's called Erich Nietzsche, The Early Years, just like Winston Churchill's autobiography or something, with a slight irony. But it's also a quite tragic story. It's a really good film that Jakob Thuesen ended up directing. But I think Lars wanted something that was unpretentious, because it is in itself quite pretentious to write a film about your own youth when you're hardly 50 years old. So I think he wanted someone with a light touch, but also because I knew the place, I knew the people that were portrayed in that film, because I went to that same school where the film takes place only a couple of years later.
Yes, you did not share the time at film school with Lars.
Yes, but
did.
I wasn't in the same. I was 1 year earlier, later. Sorry, but I was not one of the characters in the film. We were not very close when I was at that school. He had and still does have a tight group of good colleagues around him, and I wasn't one of them. But it's a shame that I didn't direct it, because I would also have loved to recreate that world that we knew so well, and we were really keen on doing it with extreme accuracy, because I think Lars thought, and I still agree, that authenticity is a really good tool for avoiding cliches. Ken Loach has said that a few times as well, that if you want to steer clear of cliches, you just have to research and do things that are correct and authentic, and then it becomes a lot stronger. So recreating the world that meant so much to me as well would have been fantastic, but it didn't work out. We had some calendar problems.
Did the film look very different when you saw it from what you would have made?
Not that much, no. No, but it was written for the specific space where the school was set then, and they couldn't recreate it there. So it's always budget issues, but it looked good. Probably looked better than if I had directed.
Tell me about your time at film school. What, for example, what kind of work tests did you submit that made you get admitted?
Photography and short stories. I didn't know how to do films. This is such a long time ago that you didn't have access to film equipment. You didn't have a cell phone that you could shoot films on. There were no cell phones, except one of those that the school itself had. So it was quite vague, and I still can't understand why I was accepted. But
can you understand why you wanted to get in?
Yes, and I can remember the relief and the joy of coming into a world where everyone loved what I loved. To be around people who had also seen that film. I thought I was the only person in the world who had seen, and I've never been so diligent, doing all my homework, being not very focused because I was quite immature and actually too young to go to school, but more focused than ever. The film, An Education, that I did before One Day, the most recent film, is scripted by Nick Hornby, and one of his major messages with that film is that if you want to learn something, it's much faster and easier if it's something you really love. That you can study whatever you want. If it's something you love, then you will learn very, very quickly. He's a former school teacher, and maybe that's how it was with film. That the reason why I managed to learn that craft was that I loved it so much that I didn't really notice that I learned how to do it.
Your love for film then came from watching film rather than
Yes.
trying to do films yourself.
Yeah. So Lars von Trier would do films on Super 8 and
When he was a
all
little kid,
sorts
yes.
Yeah. He has much stronger a technical talent than I do. He still does. He a lot of his films are created in accordance with whatever is invented, be it handheld, fast, small video cameras, or a remote-controlled little child helicopter that he could mount a camera on and make little tracking shots in here with his little remote control. So, and he would read, I think, still American Cinematographer every month. I've never been that good at all of that, so my obsession was a little bit different. But yes, I would see films constantly, and I think I'm very lucky to have been young in the 70s, where you still had so many European auteurs who were alive and producing films. You could go and you could look forward to the next Fellini film or the next Ingmar Bergman film,
The next Kurosawa film, the
yes,
next Buñuel.
Yes, and
Yes.
which is a huge privilege. And also in American cinema, the mainstream American cinema was more controversial than now, and the strongest Italian American directors, Coppola and his generation, were peaking at their career. So it was truly hugely inspiring. But I still feel more related to the Southern European earlier films than any of that. The small, modest Italian films and the early Truffaut films, I feel a connection with those films that's much stronger than, for instance, my connection with Swedish or even Danish films. It's like I have a cinema family somewhere with directors whose language I don't even speak.
Many people, kind of your age and around that, will say Danes will say that there were really no films made in Denmark at that time for people our age. There was a film. Some say that the film Night Watch, Nattevakten, was finally a film for where you would watch people that you could identify with.
Yeah.
Is that
There were one or two truly interesting films a year in the 70s in Denmark. There were some. Niels Malmros is really a good and a strong
who made
Nordic
films
director.
about young people, usually amateurs.
Yes. But it was just not very much in fashion to go and see
cool.
A Danish film. It wasn't cool. I fear that we are losing territory in Denmark at the moment. There's a huge diversity in Danish films, but because the budgets are generally quite low, the conflicts are unfortunately also generally smallish, and I think the audience is getting less enthusiastic with films like that look like Italian for beginners, that are low budget, low tech, small scenes, people in kitchens, dysfunctional families. There's a little too much of that going on at the moment. We need the type of strong new generation that they get some experience and take over. I think it's happening a little more actually at the moment in Sweden and Norway. But it will. It's just that there's a generation of young up-and-coming filmmakers in Denmark who either are not as experienced or are thinking too commercially. So you have a little too few strong new voices at the moment. But I think it's maybe in 2 years there's going to be and also my generation of film directors are not really old enough to be kicked off our chairs, so that's a little problematic.
But you haven't done a film in Denmark now since 2006-7, correct?
Yes.
So we're talking 5-6 years.
Yes.
And like people like Bill August and Lasse Hallström, we kind of lose them sometimes to the foreign cinema. Are you having any plans now doing something in Danish?
Not really, no. But Bill August is shooting a Danish film now.
And Lasse Hallström is shooting in Swedish.
That's true, yeah.
So you never say never, but let's before we get to that stage, you said something before, winding the clock back 10 minutes. You said that there were, in my earlier films, when you got out of film school, you said that there are some seconds here and there that I feel that I'm quite happy with, and that kind of is something that I can relate to. I'd like to show here the opening of your very first film, your first feature film.
Oh, okay.
It's and if there is a Lone Scherfig,
and I have the higher week.
This is a story about a lonely man who would like to have a girlfriend, and what happens on his 40-year-old birthday. You mentioned when we talked about Italian for beginners that there were some kind of people who were a little, kind of not on the best place in their life at the moment, but they would kind of, there would be an opening. All of a sudden they could do something else with their life. And Kai, who is this Kai's birthday, Kai's födelsedag, he could be in Italian. The actor is actually in Italian for beginners as well, but he could kind of be one of those characters. Am I correct that these seconds is kind of it's quite your style, your kind of universe?
Well, all these films are generally about people who are insecure, are quite lonely. It's culture clashes, people who are not very good at talking or expressing anything. I think actually in an education, the Carey Mulligan part, Jenny, who is 17, very strong, and who says, I want to smoke and go to Paris and wear black and be an existentialist. She's the first time I've ever had a protagonist who really has a strong purpose. And it's also the first time I've had a female protagonist. All the other films are about men in their 30s, more or less.
And it's the first time that you've not written the script.
No, this one I didn't write.
You didn't write,
no.
sorry.
But I can feel that that is unfortunately also a stage that I am moving away from. That I'd like to do things that are much more genre-oriented, where I use my craft more, thrillers or horror or weapons, guns, shiny suits. The care that I used to have for my characters is little by little disappearing. And also because love has been an important sub-theme in most of the films I've done, or the main theme. I tend to want to move away from that too. And I tend to like love films less. I used to think that I didn't enjoy seeing a film that didn't have some sort of love story in it, and I didn't enjoy seeing films that had not just a spark of humor here and there. But I'm moving away from it. It's a loss of innocence, maybe, but it's also an appetite for film itself and for the craft itself, and it's a courage that I have achieved from working in England, because being away from my comfort zone with old film school friends and crew that I love, and just be forced to work with people I didn't know and stand on my own feet in a work culture I didn't know, and with budgets that are bigger than we even had when we shot in Poland in the late 80s. It's has given me the courage to try and expand my expression and expand my ambition. So I'm hoping to do a project that is challenging on a technical level, but also on a personal level. But maybe the films are not going to be as nice as the earlier ones, and hopefully I can maintain some sort of warmth and care for the characters, even if I do horror. And maybe I should remember that, because I don't want to make a film that I wouldn't want to go and see.
Although I'm very happy that you made these films, they, and not least Italian for Beginners, must have given you some kind of character or trademark. You must have, and I know this for a fact, it's not something I'm guessing, you must have been sent so many scripts from all over the place, because Italian for Beginners was big abroad and it won prizes in Berlin and then moved out. You must have been sent so many scripts about middle-aged people going to Italy, finding themselves, or
and I still get sent scripts, and very often the scripts look like, for a reason, like films you've already done.
Okay, Spanish for Beginners.
And my husband would always say, "Why don't you make another one of those?" Or Wilbur Wants to Kill Himself, which was the Scottish film I did after Italian for Beginners, which is not as sad as its title. Or off-putting as its title, Who Wants to Be with a Man Who Wants to Kill Himself on a Friday evening. But unfortunately, there's no way back, really. It's as if I've tasted blood. But maybe when I get to Bille August's age, I would want to come back to to maybe where I belong, in terms of where I belong with my relation to the characters and to the camera and to the audience.
But do you get?
I sound more confused than I am.
But do you get? Yes, but do you get little?
And thank you for allowing me to think out loud and reflect on what I should do with my life. I hope I'm not wasting your time too much. But
well, I have another appointment. No, but do you get a little annoyed when you are being described as a humanist filmmaker who loves your characters, and you take maybe the little ordinary man or woman and you give them a little better place in life and things like that.
No, I'm really
people leave
proud.
the cinema with a feeling that this cannot go at Sam and everything's going to be okay. And
I'm. It makes me very
do
proud.
you get many letters from people? Do people stop you on the street saying, "Oh, you"?
Not anymore. They used to. No.
Italian for Beginners was seen by a million Danes or something like this.
800,000, yeah. It's not that many.
So it's 20% of the Danish population. Yes. And then we have to take away including the infants and people with bad eyesight who don't go to the movies and things. I'm curious. I don't know what happened here, but I know that this is not unusual. But sometimes we find it very exciting in Scandinavia if a film gets picked up by an American studio as option and things. And I seem to recall that Italian for Beginners was picked up immediately, more or less, and was going to be made in America, perhaps with you directing it. What happened there?
No. No, but Miramax bought it, and I didn't know then how much it means for a Nordic film or a European film to get American distribution. It is a huge audience, and it gives a different kind of respect around the film, so that if it's been bought by an American company, a lot of other companies from other countries will want to see the film. So that was a strike of luck. And the festivals, the international film festivals, including this one, is extremely important to filmmakers, because they help illuminate the films, and they help the films find an audience. And in Denmark, we are very dependent on that the Danish Ministry of Culture in the Film Institute has a festival office that helps our films travel. Smaller production companies might not be able to do that by themselves. Even here, I was about 10 years ago, and someone will then see your film and invite it to a different place and a different festival, and so for the festivals, first of all, it's for the audience who get a chance to see films they wouldn't have seen, but it's also for the filmmakers to meet, and finally it's a window for small films like ours. So, and the same thing is the case with the Swedish films, of course. A director like Lukas Moodysson is a typical director who got a huge international career, and where a lot of people saw his work because the festival, not just because, but partly because the festivals would help his films find a different audience. So it's hugely important. The most recent film I've done, Ian Dog, when I first saw the production schedule, you normally you see we shoot, then we edit, then we do sound, then there's music, then there's laboratory work, and then you think, and then which festival is it we try to get the film accepted into? And I could see that there was nothing there, and would ask the production company, why don't you want to do this? But the American attitude is, with a film like that, it's not important at all. It doesn't make sense to spend the money, because the film already has American distribution, and why would they want to send it to Venice and buy hotel rooms for Anne Hathaway and all of that? Because it's not necessary. So that's a different mindset that I had to get used to.
They even have this notion that if some of their films are being shown in Venice, for example, there is a potential loss of audience, because some people might say, "Oh, if it's shown in Venice, it's going to be an arty film."
Really?
Yes. So,
okay.
we better steer clear. Oh, that's one of those favorites from Toronto. We don't want to see that, for example. This is a discussion that's taken place right now, and it affects Berlin in a way that it didn't do 10 years ago when you came there with Italian for Beginners. So it's it's an interesting. It's a different. I mean, One Day and Dog is probably a very different experience for you compared to even an Education, which was
completely,
which was kind of the similar audience, or what shall I say? But let's go back again a little to. We're jumping back and forth. That's okay.
Sure.
Ping pong. Let's watch another clip. Let's watch another clip. Another opening. It's a Dogma film that came. It's kind of interesting, because the first Dogma films many of them were something else. There was provocation combined with dogma, and this was in a way very provoking, because it wasn't provocative at all. I don't know, but what kind of expectations?
I am not very provocative.
What kind of expectations do you think that people had when they saw this film, and why do you think it made not only? I mean, it made the whole Dogma movement last for 10 more years, I think.
Oh no, that's the dogma rules. It's themselves that it's not that film.
Yeah, but people were curious again to seek out the dogma films.
but people misunderstood what dogma was. They thought that more of Lars von Trier's films were dogma films, and that it was about that it was handheld and bleak and edited in a rough way. And the actual definition of dogma, the films that obey to the vow of chastity and the dogma rules, is narrower, and there are fewer films. There are more films than people think, but fewer of Lars von Trier. Lars von Trier has only done one of them. So it became a label for a certain kind of Nordic, bleak, sad, out of focus film with provocative elements. But that wasn't the case, and I think a lot of people were came to me and said they were grateful that the film was not as shaky as some of the other films. It is handheld and it does stick to all those rules, but it was lighter. The thing that is interesting from a commercial point of view is that by definition European, Scandinavian films would generally be art house because they're subtitled. So with very few exceptions, they would never access a big audience because they end up in art house cinemas. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the fact that they're shooting that once again in Stockholm is an example of they do this because they know the film has a huge potential, and it's not that the first version is a bad film at all, but that they know that it can never reach its full commercial potential without being in English. And because this film was art house, being in Danish and therefore subtitled, the art house audience were relieved to come into a dark academic cinema and then see something that's basically quite romantic and humorous and light. So it got but not that romantic and not that cliche written. If that script had been shot as a conventional film, it might have been too sugar sweet and also too far-fetched, because 5 people die in the first 20 minutes and everyone in that classroom ends up matching up. They end up like 3 couples, like in an old-fashioned romantic ballet or something. And I don't think you would ever buy that story structure if this film had not been handheld and shaky and defocused and cutty. That is in fact the only rule that I didn't obey, is that you sign a piece of paper saying that there are a lot of things you will refrain from, but you can't use dramatic structure, and I obviously did. It's my daughter is born in 94, and after I had given birth to her, I started writing scripts again so I could stay at home and have her sitting in a little chair on the desk, and then I started doing television series writing. And I think you can see in this film that it has a TV series structure, an ensemble story where you just move each of the characters one little step at a time, the way characters interact in a lot of TV series. So it has TV structure, but no one has ever sued me for using that. But that was a breach of the dogma rules, definitely. That was a long answer.
Your secret's safe with us. The series you wrote, one of the series you worked on was one that was quite popular in Sweden as well. It's called Taxa.
Yeah.
It's about a taxi station in Copenhagen and different people. And a handful of the actors, who are all now very
much
older, yeah. But they're also they're well known, and you see them in leading parts, and distinguished actors. Jesper Christensen, who plays the father, who is going to play the lead part in Jan Troell's forthcoming film, for example. But anyway, there were several of the actors from Taxa. I realized that when I saw it now, that you wrote some episodes of Taxa and you also directed. Several of the people in Taxa turns up in Italian for Beginners.
Yeah.
But interestingly, they're all very, very different personalities, almost against type.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the really sweet guy Jürgen Mortensen, who works at the hotel, for example. He's kind of the toughest driver. Taxa Mike in Taxa, for example. Anne Eleonora Jørgensen, who is playing the hairdresser, who is kind of a little insecure but kind of very tender girl in many ways. She's kind of a tough lawyer in Taxa, and there are probably several other examples as well. Is this was it kind of? Did you pick some of these characters and actors and gave them?
I like a lot to work with actors who do something they haven't done. It means that, of course, you run a chance, but it also makes you have them act out and the audience see things they've never seen before, and it adds a freshness and an unpredictability in the acting that I really like. I think you can take it too far. There are actors who can't do comedy, who don't have the funny bone and the comic timing, but can still be wonderful actors, and that is something that I can't teach. But going the other way around, having comedians do tragic roles, or having that was one fantastic thing about doing radio, that you could cast people only for their voices and not for their looks. So you could have I did one of the
radio
many
plays.
detours is radio drama. But it's a wonderful element of my job as a director to find new aspects of an actor with that actor, and to see to see them do things they didn't know they were able to do, and often simple things. I'm the proudest when actors come back and say that I made it feel easy, because I'm not the kind of director who like conflicts with actors or to be on the phone at 4 a.m. in the morning. I really thrive in harmony, and as I'm saying, I'm not very provocative, and I don't really like headwind. I'm much better off, and I shoot much better material when I feel respected, and that people laugh at my not very good jokes, and that I am with people I respect as well and care for. So doing that with actors in a very tender way, where they just hopefully can get better than they've ever been, and I can help them improve as actors, that's super exciting and rewarding, and hopefully entertaining for the audience as well. It does become more true when they do something they've never done. It gets life and authenticity, but it makes you and they just like I want to do a film that's not another one of those. They also want to play a part that's not another one of those. But you just have to put, like I try and put myself at a place where it's challenging but not so hard that I can't live up to those challenges. You have to do the same thing with actors, or anyone else in the crew if you can do that. One of the ways to do it for me is also by working with people who are sometimes younger than I am, because you learn a lot from the next generation, and it forces you to maintain your craft and to stay alert and interested and see new films all the time, instead of just thinking that you know how to make films.
Do you give lectures now and then at the Danish Film School for the younger?
Very
pupils?
little, but I do teach occasionally, yes. And I have one student at the moment that I just follow and mentor.
All right.
And I'm also, there's a mentoring program in, this is great, this is something I wish there has been when I was a young director, that you, they couple up young Irish directors with other directors, and then you follow a person, help them, and they have like I'm sort of the secret director aunt of a young Irish film director, that I can give him advice, listen to his worries, read his scripts without anyone else knowing, and with no obligations at all. And I think maybe if I'd had one of those myself when I was younger, it might have helped me be more secure and find my own voice at an earlier stage. It's a really good system. But some people have that logically in their surroundings. Lars von Trier was really helpful to me for a number of years, trusting that I could do something and praising my work and giving me really good advice for maybe 5-6 years. But up until then, and up until this film, Italian for Beginners, I didn't really have anyone that I would trust and admire enough to listen to. Because that's another aspect. You can have all these people who want to help you and want to have opinions, but it has to be someone who you respect artistically and morally and as a human being. But that's a good system. I hope it's going to come to Denmark, or maybe the Nordic countries could develop some sort of mentoring system.
Very, very agreeable, very likable.
I would have loved to have Jan Troell, for instance. That would have been a great privilege.
It's not too late, perhaps. You can get in touch with him.
It sounds like he's
now, I
busy.
mean, you're practically neighbors. You live in Småland and he in Simrishamn. Okay, a couple of hours there. I would like to watch another clip, if I may.
Hvordan går det med vores tid?
Ja, det går.
Concentrate. Cock this up.
Er det rart at se dem igen.
Jamen er det ikke sådan?
Hvor er det ærgerligt, de ikke bor i København.
We have to. We could do this for a little while longer, but just briefly, like you were kind of. Did you ever feel when you got an education, don't blow it, or was it just like any other job, or was it a little more scary?
You have to be able to run a risk and not focus too much on it, because if you do, there's something about doing comedy and being nervous that really doesn't work. You have to be a little more fearless. I remember Åke Sandgren, the Swedish director, he always said when his first films came out in Denmark that he'd go to the multiplex and see his poster, I think it was Kodisbellan, and then the new Spielberg film and the new James Bond film and all of those, and in the middle of it was his film, and he said it's completely hopeless, but that is a condition, that you have to go to work and go to sleep every night after you've shot, and know that when this film comes out, there will also be a lot of much stronger films in the market. So, and I remember when I did an education, I thought the best thing I can do is just stay really, really faithful to Nick Hornby, and just get that fragile script through the film machine unharmed. So that was my focus, and not worrying about whether it would flop. But I didn't run very many risks on that film. It was the budget was quite small. I only had time to shoot exactly what was in the script, and there's less artistic license when you work in England than when you work here. So there's not as much spontaneity in an education as in the films I've done in Denmark. I feel much freer as a director when I work in Denmark than in England. But Focus Features, who produced this film, is a very director-oriented company. They have strong directors, and they give you complete freedom and a lot of resources. And the resources, the time, the big toolbox, the big crew, that is inspiring in itself, and that's a different kind of freedom to have much more to choose from. Whereas if you work on a small Scandinavian budget, the freedom is artistic, a bigger freedom in a smaller with a smaller equipment. Where in England you have larger equipment but a little less freedom, so it pretty much adds up. The thing is, if you agree with the investors and the producers and are good at explaining exactly what it is that you want to do, then nobody gets afraid or disappointed, and then you get more space. But I'm used to it because I've done so many commercials during those wasted years, so I'm used to working under in a quite controlled environment too.
Yes, I was thinking. I mean, you have a reputation for making, warm-hearted comedies, humorous films with love in them and romance. But maybe you also have a reputation of because you made Italian for beginners with quite little money. Maybe you have a reputation for being able to make more out of a small budget.
I think that goes for Scandinavian directors in general. When working abroad, that we are good at explaining what it is we do. We are quite verbal. There's a tradition for talking about what we do from Dramatiska Institutet and from the Danish Film School, and I think Lillehammer as well. When they say, you can only have 250 extras, you go, wow, 250? I've never had that many in my life. We do get good at making do with little. And that's an advantage, especially now, because the film industry now are doing fewer mid-range budget films. They're either really big or much smaller. But much smaller still means a budget that's quite a lot better than is realistic when you shoot in a language as small as Danish. Of course, this country is much bigger.
Before we wind up and say, I hope for more next time. What are you working on right now? Are you far into another project at the moment?
I hope so. I have 3-4 projects that I've been developing for some years, writing or somebody else writing, and it's like it's the script that gets the best, or the film that somebody wants to invest in, whatever comes first. But I think I will be shooting in England in the fall. I just don't know which film it'll be. It would be nice to know, so I can start focusing.
I would like to have one audience question, if there is one. Everyone feel that we covered all the ground? Well then, seems...
I wonder how it is for you to speak Danish, to direct in English, and about this, that if Danish is your, how do you call it, home language, is it difficult for you to hear when they sound really truth, or?
Yeah, it is a handicap. It's not a big handicap, but yes.
So how do you manage then? How do you work your way around it?
I have a knowledge of my own language. I have idiosyncrasies. I have a knowledge about intonation that I don't think I'll ever have in a different language. But one way to work around it is to cast actors who you know have a good ear for dialogue themselves, and I think it helps if you admit you have a problem. If you ask, tell the script supervisor to be much more aware of that than she would normally be, with an education, I would go through the script in detail with the writer to make sure that I got all the jokes, that there weren't jokes in the script that I didn't understand. I do understand every word, but there could still be something that I hadn't seen. But it doesn't matter how I speak. And authenticity and good acting is not only about sound. You can also see if things don't ring true. I just have to remind myself how many of the best English language films are done by people who aren't English. Or Swedish films are done by people who weren't originally Swedish for that matter. So it's one of the many one of the many things where I'm not 100% good, and I think getting surrounding yourself with people who are good at what I'm not good at is always is probably the best advice I can give anyone. That, and then to pick your battles carefully.
Thank you.
Thank you.